other solutions in terms of putting together a very aggressive, responsible, reform-oriented proposal?
I think that, of course, there's things that we need now to meet the guidelines and to make California more competitive. And the governor's made his proposal. As always, we're always interested in hearing other ideas and other proposals. We're also, like you, waiting for the final guidelines. And of course, this is a collaborative process. We need to work with the legislature as well as all the stakeholders. And we have a proposal that's in front of the legislature. And I think those are the governor's priorities at the moment. And they could change, but right now, that is his proposal.
Okay. And just in terms of, and this is a question really for both of you, and if the state board was here, I'd ask you all collectively, but where in your process is your outreach to the legislature, I guess, is my question. I know that we're having hearings, and the Senate has had some hearings. I think we're reaching out to you. I'm just wondering, in your process, it sounded like I heard you want to go out to various districts and hear from districts and so forth, outreach there, but relative to us here in the legislature, is there a specific protocol that you're going to use in terms of outreach with us?
I don't think we've reached the point of developing a protocol for outreach to the legislature. Certainly we're meeting with legislative staff, and we've done so regularly. This is certainly part of the outreach, and hearing your ideas, comments, and questions helps inform our application process and what needs to be our priorities. Obviously, we're both going to take things back to our principals and say, here's what we heard from the legislature, here's what their concerns are, here's what their questions are, and all of that is part of the process. I think we're open to any other type of input or meetings or discussions that you all are interested in, because it's an extremely important part of the process. The application needs to have letters of support from all of those stakeholders, as well as hopefully some legislators. Any legislation that's enacted obviously is a sign that the legislature is at least signing on to parts of it. So it's very important. It's critical. This is an entire state effort. It's not just the governor. It's not just the superintendent. It's not just the legislature, and it's not just the school districts. It's the entire state. And in some ways, although it seems really complex, it's really pretty smart of Secretary Duncan to put it out this way, because it really means that no one can move forward alone or in isolation. Everyone has to move forward together, and that's both a blessing and a curse, I guess, when it comes to something like this in a short time frame.
Thank you. And I would just, final comment, I'm a firm believer that to sustain any kind of reform, you have to have collaboration and buy-in. Otherwise, I've been in a school district for a long time, and I've seen it work and I've seen it not work, but really having that, getting to that cultural change and sustaining reform really requires buy-in. I want to thank you both for being here, and it was very informative, and I look forward to your participation at future hearings as we move through this process. Thank you very much. And our next panel, our next line of speakers is a panel, and it includes Patricia Rucker with the California Teachers Association, Sherry Griffin with the Association of California School Administrators, Erica Hoffman with California School Boards Association, and Gary Ravani with the California Federation of Teachers. Each of them will share some of their input that they have provided to the federal government in response to the preliminary guidance. And just a suggestion to my colleagues, if we'll hold off on questions until the panel has completed their testimony, that would be very helpful. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. And I will let the panel decide who shall go first.
They're pointing. I'm Sherry Griffith with the Association of California School Administrators, and we're very pleased to be here and appreciate the opportunity to share our views on Race to the Top. guidelines that we currently have seen. We represent over 16,000 school and district and county administrators in our state, and we want you to know we very much support the 4 assurances that have been put forth in Race to the Top. We do encourage the committee to look at improving on the good work that our school districts and schools are already doing in the state, despite the severe budget cuts that we have been facing over the last few years. We do, however, encourage, though it is a race to the top, that you take a longer and broader view of the timelines associated with ESEA reauthorization, because we really do believe that will be the foundation of the reforms for the majority of our schools and districts in California. At this time, we know with the Secretary's advancement of that, the urgency of that reauthorization, if we don't have that first, in our view, then this becomes yet another layer that our school district administrators will have to address. We were in D.C. last week, and we met with Secretary Duncan's staff, as many of our colleagues have, and his remarks were encouraging about the sense of urgency. But we also met with members of Congress, both the Democrats and the Republicans, and because of health care and because of higher education reforms, this may not occur until later next year. So we do remain concerned that we might be moving quickly on a grant program when we haven't seen the full picture yet. With that, we would recommend that you identify only those absolute reforms needed for Race to the Top, and then proceed with caution in other areas until we see the broader reform effort on ESEA. What Secretary Duncan told us last week is they want to be tight on the goals but loose on the means. The best decisions are local decisions, and that RTT is only one aspect of ESEA reauthorization. And I want to repeat that because I know some feel this is the foundation. We think it's going to be just one aspect. We do concur with the Secretary that the local solution is the best solution. We're somewhat perplexed by the prescriptive nature of the guidelines, and we just want to recommend a few points to this and some recommendations for the committee. Under the improving effective use of data and effective teachers and leaders, which we will provide more input at later hearings, we want you to know that we very much support the use of student achievement data as one important component for principal and teacher effectiveness. We do not believe, however, that it is the sole indicator of teacher or principal effectiveness. We polled our 16,000 members, and we asked them the question, do you believe statewide standardized tests provide adequate achievement data for teacher and principal evaluations? 77% said no. 2 of their comments on that. Test data is not enough without the considerations of demographics, teacher administrator training records, and realistic comparisons of schools with similar demographics. We also had comments such as we need a student growth model that measures individual student growth over time, and we need to make assessments more meaningful to middle and high school students. These are the kinds of things that you're hearing from administrators locally, because as the system ramps up and becomes more high stakes, then our system, in our view, must evolve and become more mature for that purpose. We do believe in comprehensive evaluations at the local level. We don't think that is the role of the state, but we do think you can use the student achievement data in very effective ways at the state level, and that is to evaluate the effectiveness of the state programs that you have mandated. And a couple of examples of that would be, are our universities able to produce the quality teachers that we need? We think you can look at CalTIDES and CalPADS and use that system to see if that's happening. In the area of turning around struggling schools, we actually differ with the Secretary's office that it is choice. We think there's a lot of prescription in the guidelines, and we're concerned about that. Actually, of the 4 cures or the options for struggling schools, all 4 require the removal of the school principal. And we don't feel that that is always the solution to the problem. We've made recommendations to the Secretary that we need to look at this in a more broader context. So we've recommended a number of things. In regards to the private companies operating schools and charters, we are very concerned that there's a lack of detail in the guidelines as to their accountability. And so our recommendations are as follows. We recommend that our NCLB Corrective Action District model be included as one option for the state to apply for the grant, just one. You can do other things. Allow districts to submit plans for their lowest performing schools to the state and ultimately for approval by the federal government through the plan, and that we hold charters and private companies to the same accountability requirements and rules followed by traditional schools, including but not limited to conflict of interest requirements, open meeting law requirements, fiscal accountability, and academic achievement goals. In the area of ensuring quality standards and assessments, the last of the four, we would recommend that there really is a need to focus on key standards and performance goals in our system, and that we need a more in-depth assessment system. 94% of our members said that they would support a review of our K-12 standards and assessments to see if they align with nationally benchmarked standards and that we can compete internationally and be compared to other states. And this is very important. It does not mean water down our standards. What it means is that we look at what all students should know and be able to do, and that the high school diploma and the whole schism we've had between career tech and college readiness, that we move beyond that and we move into an effort, again, maturing the system where we understand what we expect of a high school diploma, and we move beyond the schism that we've all had to deal with in California. Finally, we want to recommend that you have some actions you can take as a committee right now in some of these areas. There is legislation on the governor's desk that we support and think moves the ball forward. SB 19, removing the firewall, or at least being silent on that issue, is one of them. AB 429, the chairwoman's bill, which really begins to address the need to develop an assessment and accountability system based on academic growth of students, classrooms, and schools. We also support AB 97 that we would have to be reintroduced by Assemblyman Torlakson to review our standards to ensure that we meet key performance standards and that we have performance goals, and that we have legislation, perhaps in special session, that would allow us to reauthorize the STAR system to develop more meaningful assessments that go beyond multiple choice tests. And finally, AB 1435 by Mr. Perez that would include our English learner SELT results in our accountability system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us here today. I'm Gary Ravani. I am president of the Early Childhood K-12 Council of the California Federation of Teachers. I have 35 years of experience in the classroom, most of those years at the middle school. CFT has many significant reservations about many elements of Race to the Top, specifically about the stipulations and assurances. This includes concerns about the validity and reliability of linking student achievement data with individual teacher data, particularly for the high-stakes purposes outlined within the required assurances in Race to the Top. Every major professional organization in the United States cautions against the use of data from a test designed to do one thing, as it measures student achievement, to measure something else, as in teacher effectiveness. These organizations include the American Psychological Association, the American Educational Research Association, and the National Council on Measurement and Education. In particular, the American Psychological Association, to quote them, says, "It's important to remember that no test is valid for all purposes. To use California standards test results for teacher evaluation would be like your physician using the results of your cholesterol test to evaluate if you needed to have hip replacement surgery. It's not that the cholesterol test is bad. It's just bad to use it for a purpose for which it was not intended. It's not the case that a test is a test is a test." Another national organization, the Center for Assessment and Student Learning, suggests, quote, "It turns out that assessing teaching quality is a very complex task, and because most student achievement tests were not designed to be used for teacher evaluations, we recommend that they be reviewed and validated for such purposes before such use." All of these concerns apply equally to the so-called value-added methods of evaluation. It is claimed that measuring the gains students make from fall to spring, rather than students' absolute achievement levels, are a more objective way of evaluating teacher effectiveness. A study by economist Jesse Rothstein, reviewed in July 15th Education Week, asserts otherwise. He states that value-added always assumes that students are placed with teachers in an absolutely random manner, and that's not the case. Each school and district has a distinct social milieu and a political climate that determines which teachers get which students. So value-added systems have an internal bias. Sometimes the bias sends the most difficult students to teachers who have a demonstrated talent for working with troubled students. It might not actually be a reform to disrupt that kind of system. Not that disrupting the kind of system would be easy. 2 other researchers went to Los Angeles in the last year to propose to 200 school principals that a plan to completely randomly assign students be implemented in order to test value added. Only 78 of the principals agreed to participate. Researchers at Mathematica Policy Research in Princeton, New Jersey are going to undertake a study designed to sidestep the random student assignment bias by randomly assigning teachers to students in 7 districts. They don't expect to have results on that system for several years. It's worthy of notice that while Race to the Top calls for a comprehensive performance-based evaluation system, it doesn't go on to say what that might look like. No one knows what it might look like right now because it is so complex. It's so complex, in fact, that the Gates Foundation just dedicated $500 million to study that question. Note that that amount is about what California is expected to get in total from participation in Race to the Top. Whatever happens around teacher and student data systems that include unique educator and student identifiers, it is an absolute imperative that student and teacher privacy rights be protected. CFT is aware that there are school districts in California currently using test score data in teacher evaluation. That's by mutual agreement between those districts and their teacher unions, completed at the bargaining table under collective bargaining law. Summative decisions about teacher pay, teacher evaluation, and teacher benefits must be bargained at the local level. CFT has significant questions about the assurance that California adopt internationally benchmarked standards. These standards are being developed by a consortium of states. Some key questions are, how will these standards match up with California's current standards? Will this process involve the adoption of a whole new set of assessments and curriculum materials? Is California fiscally able to deal with that kind of adoption process, or would the cost be prohibitive? Current process for developing the new standards has generated considerable concern within the educational community over a lack of transparency and over the lack of participation of classroom teachers or their representatives. Merely giving teachers input is not enough. Educationally appropriate national standards will be informed by teachers' experiences and not driven by political or ideological motives. They must be rooted firmly in research and include subject matter content specific enough to lead to a knowledge-rich curriculum that can be learned in a school year. There need to be extensive professional development and model lessons to be provided to newer teachers by more experienced teachers. All of this will require internationally benchmarked levels of resources and support. Reality-based accountability systems should be considered concurrently with new demands for accountability for the standards, and it must be wide-spectrum accountability that encompasses all of the stakeholders, including parents, communities, and the state. Schools, after all, have students for 17% of their waking lives between kindergarten and 12th grade. The students spend the other 83% with their families and in their communities. It's fair to say that California gets a lot of bang for its buck currently from the K-12 system, but it is not possible to be the 17% tail that wags the 83% dog. California's own testing vendor, the Educational Testing Service, or ETS, has done research available on its website. The Family, America's Smallest School, that asserts there are 4 factors. 1, single-parent families. 2, parents reading to young children. 3, hours spent watching television. And 4, frequency of school absences that accounts for 2/3 of the difference. That is the achievement gap in reading scores and national tests at 8th grade. In another report, ETS discusses 14 correlates related to school achievement. 6 of the correlates are school-related, and the other 8 are community and family-related. The schools cannot do it all alone. Related to the assurance on recruiting, developing, and retaining effective teachers and principals, now known as great teachers and leaders, CFT believes that the routes to a teaching career, whether those are traditional or alternative routes, should be founded on building successful professionals who are effective teachers who can facilitate student academic success. And that being said, CFT supports rigorous and transparent procedures for awarding permanent status. Again, standardized test scores do not have the research-based validity and reliability to be used in evaluation, compensation, or dismissal of teachers. And the further linking of test scores to evaluation, compensation, and possibly dismissal will only lead to an intensification of that well-known phenomenon of narrowing the curriculum. Students are denied a rigorous exposure to music, art, career and technical education, or any other subject matter not dealt with by the testing. Charter schools were supposed to be the silver bullet for all that ails educational achievement. Indeed, some charter schools may have a concentration on experimentation and educational innovation that may prove worthwhile. But in terms of achievement, that's another question. A Stanford University study recently revealed only 17% of charter school students outperform regular public school students. 34%, more than twice as many, do worse than regular public school students, and the rest show no difference. As a silver bullet, charter schools have been a misfire. For the assurance on turning around struggling schools, CFT has more concerns. There are research-based strategies that do help schools. Smaller class size, individual tutoring, before and after school programs, wraparound schools that are community hubs for healthcare and social services year-round, rigorous school-wide discipline policies, ongoing professional development, a strong teacher presence in curriculum and school decision-making processes, and a common planning time for staff. There is no research to support closing down schools, disrupting student lives and communities as a valid turnaround strategy. Already mentioned is the false strategy of turning schools over to charter organizations. CFT does commend the race to the top overall selection criterion that calls for the demonstration of support from the state's teacher unions. Both President Obama and Secretary Duncan have emphasized that they do want to work with teachers and not do things to teachers. We are hopeful they will live up to those commitments. CFT understands that the timeline for final presentation of Race to the Top by the U.S. Department of Education is being delayed, and those regulations may well change. CFT would like to thank and commend the California Assembly for taking an appropriate and reserved course in taking the Race to the Top preliminary proposals under consideration. There is a great deal of talk about data today. Data isn't knowledge. Even if it was, knowledge isn't wisdom. We are desperate in the schools for wisdom. CFT is confident that the deliberations held here will result in the wisest decisions about how to proceed with Weight Race to the Top. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravani, and welcome to our chambers. Thanks for testifying today.
Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Rucker, and I'm a legislative advocate for the California Teachers Association. The California Teachers Association anticipated that there would be some fundamental changes in federal policy concerning education, particularly in priorities for turning around low-performing schools and in how schools are funded to support those programs. Unfortunately, the Race to the Top, as it's currently proposed, is laid over a foundation that, frankly, is fundamentally flawed. It relies on, or actually over-relies on, test scores as an accurate measure of student achievement, and it supports interventions that do not have a track record of success, such as unregulated charter schools and compensation tied to test scores. The nice thing about being the third speaker is there are some things I won't have to repeat, so I promise you I won't. Race to the Top may be a voluntary application process, but clearly the priorities and criteria in the proposal do privilege certain past and future actions by state and local education agencies, and they do hold them hostage by the purse strings. So I need to ask you, when we take the money off the table, which is what has been said today, would this committee, would the legislature, would the state be tackling the mandates of Race to the Top because there is a fundamental belief that these are the directions that the state has intended to go? CTA would bring your attention to 6 areas of concern that were raised in the Race to the Top proposal. First, there's a continuing link of student achievement to success on a test. Since 2001, the emphasis on standardized testing as the primary measure of student achievement has been scrutinized and criticized on many fronts. Unfortunately, the Race to the Top proposal does not reflect a substantive change toward a more balanced approach or method for evaluating student learning and achievement. Since 1999, California has gone through a very structured process from moving from an off-the-shelf assessment to aligning our assessment program and practices to state content standards. So take the money off the table. Tackling the mandates of Race to the Top, would this be the direction that the state would have continued to go? And is that the trajectory of our testing and assessment policies? Is that the belief that this legislature is taking on in looking at Race to the Top? 2, balancing federal mandates with priorities for local control. Underlying many of the issues in the Race to the Top proposal is an expansion of authority by the federal government into the areas of traditional state and local control. My question to you is, how much state and local autonomy has to be surrendered in order to receive the federal funding under Race to the Top? I want to remind you that there are members sitting in this committee today who have made very unsuccessful attempts to open a conversation again for the state of California to look at their standards. And those attempts have been unsuccessful for a number of reasons. But today, we are looking at a proposal that will require us to transfer our autonomy to determine and evaluate our student content standards to a body outside of this state that does not engage stakeholders and the members of the public in these school and local communities in a meaningful way that will create buy-in to the standards we're asked to evaluate. So, taking the money off the table, if we were tackling the mandates for Race to the Top, looking at and evaluating our content standards, is this the policy trajectory that the legislature would have taken? 3, defining teacher effectiveness based on student test scores. The Race to the Top proposal includes new definitions for teacher effectiveness and proposes that the state use these ratings in high-stakes employment decisions such as evaluation, compensation, tenure, and dismissal. Under the proposal, the state selects a measure of student growth, which must primarily be test-based, and use the data from that measure to differentiate the effectiveness of individual teachers and administrators. In 1999, as part of a large package of reform measures, the state of California started taking those steps and created the policy levers to assist districts and schools in developing and focusing on improvement practices and the types of evaluative conversations that will lead to both student engagement and an understanding of the impact of teaching decisions on student test scores. Taking the money off the table. If we are going to tackle the Race to the Top mandates, is this the policy trajectory that California would be taking in looking at teacher evaluation, given the process and the policy levers that the state started implementing in 1999? Instead of using multiple measures of teaching practice and teacher performance and making high-stakes employment decisions, the Race to the Top guidelines default to a single effectiveness measure based on student test scores. Advocating expansion of charter schools without adequate quality control. The Race to the Top proposal criteria evaluates whether states have laws that prohibit or effectively inhibit increasing the number of charter schools. Any one of California's current measures to oversee, monitor, review, or even close ineffective charter schools could be viewed as effectively inhibiting the increase of charter schools under this very ambiguous language. Furthermore, the state of California is still looking at how to create a definition of effect and what is a highly effective charter school. As long as the state has been in the business of creating charters and authorizing charters, we have yet to actually create an oversight and monitoring process that gives us a clear policy definition of what an effective charter school looks like. Taking the money off the table and looking at only tackling the Race to the Top mandates, are these the policy levers, absent any other definition of control and effect, that this legislature would have taken as a policy trajectory? Finally, and most importantly, CTA believes that the Race to the Top proposal uses the wrong strategies to turn around struggling schools. Narrowing the options available to provide support to struggling schools continues the punitive approach that failed to work under No Child Left Behind. If school improvement is the goal, federal funding should be used to provide assistance to schools rather than sanctions. Under NCLB, more schools enter restructuring each year while a few schools are able to exit. Between 2006 and 2008, there was a 50% increase in the number of Title I schools that were planning or implementing restructuring efforts. Why is the Department of Education continuing to promote reform strategies that have no record to success? A key goal of Race to the Top is on closing the achievement gap and addressing a seemingly intractable problem of persistently failing schools. Debate has long raged about who is to blame for failing schools. What public concerns are going to be resolved by this project? The bureaucratic system of standardized tests, rankings, and sanctions in this grant will in reality interfere with ongoing efforts to boost achievement for all students, and it neglects to focus attention and resources on those individual students who need the most help. Is the focus then in the right place? If the focus only stays on what we will inspect, will the outcome truly be what we come to expect? We have a clear example of the conflict of equity over other values like economic priorities and even salutary neglect. This conversation needs to be less about politics and more about good public policies that will fulfill the promise of high-quality education for California students. In the details of CTA's response to the proposed regulations to Race to the Top, we have outlined multiple concepts to address the issues of education reform in California. CTA appreciates the thoughtful process that this body has initiated through these hearings, and we look forward to participating in that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rucker. And last but not least,
Erica Hoffman on behalf of the California School Boards Association. I apologize if my voice goes out. I'm recovering from the flu. It's not H1N1, it's the other one that's floating around. I can also say I think my comments have been massively shortened just because of what my colleagues have said here. We agree greatly with everything they have said. I did want to point out just a couple of other ideas that maybe could be coming to light in this. When you look at the issue under Race to the Top of the adoption of Common Core standards and Common Core assessments, at this point in time they are strictly and only talking of English language arts and mathematics. It keeps us in that same cycle that we currently have right now of narrowing the curriculum for all students. When you try to input, or I should say try to expand career technical education programs, how are these Common Core standards going to impact on that? We have a hard enough time right now trying to get programs up and running within schools to address the CTE needs of students and still be able to address this college readiness issue. So that does raise a concern because it is that furtherance of that issue for us. Did want to talk briefly about the support of the struggling schools issue because it's one thing that we found very interesting in going through the Race to the Top proposal, the notice of proposal. According to the notice, participating LEAs with schools in the lowest 5% must select one of 4 turnaround options. And regardless of what that option is, the LEA will be required to surrender all or some of their governance of the schools involved. We strongly object to the assumption that existing school governance is necessarily the cause of failure within these schools. We recommend that a less ideological and more pragmatic approach be taken to recognize that with additional resources, with additional training of both school board members, administrators, and teachers, the current governance structure and a fully accountable central office can produce a strong commitment for assisting these LEAs in their growth and in the achievement of students. Finally, I did want to just briefly touch upon a couple of the issues that are contained in the legislation that has been introduced, the SB X5, 5X1. I'm not quite sure how to put the X and the 5 together on that one. Lifting the cap on the charter schools issue. Frankly, not sure that's really going to have a real impact. We've got a huge gap in between what's currently authorized and how many schools currently function. However, as has been said by others, we do need to ensure that if we are going to do this just overarching expansion of charter schools, that there are some responsibilities within the governance structure side of it. That there are some responsibilities for Open Meetings Act, for Brown Act, for conflict of interest. And basically part of that is to ensure that as we put more and more state and federal money into these schools, that they are as accountable to the public as a regular public school is. One of the things that the governor has said is that this legislation is to address the preconditions for ensuring that California is eligible to apply. One of the pieces in this bill does deal with the open enrollment issue. This has been legislation that has been introduced in the past in this House, did not make it out of this House, and he is putting it into this proposal. It's not to say that it's a bad proposal. I think that's a full policy discussion it needs to have. But it is not a precondition for California's application for this grant. It's kind of one of those additional things that might be nice, but it doesn't preclude us from applying for it, and we do not believe it is appropriate to include in this legislation those things that are above and beyond those things that are needed just to get us eligible. As of right now, what the federal government has said, we need to lift the cap on the charters, whether we see that as a problem or not, that we need to get rid of the firewall, and that we do need to ensure that we've got the connections within our data system for basically a P20 system of data. Those are the things that we have to address in order to be eligible to apply. We believe those are the only things that really need to be addressed within legislation at this point in time. And especially the fact that the final regulations have not come out from the federal government. We are waiting. Last I heard, they had thousands of responses. It's going to take them a while to get through all that. I have heard, I've just got back from Boston meeting with my counterparts nationally from about 28 other states. And it was very interesting. They all seem to think they've been told that they need to apply for this because everybody's going to get some money. Well, it's going to be very interesting because there are a lot of states that are farther behind than us. A lot of states that are grappling with many of these same questions. And so it will be rather interesting to see what these final regulations come out to look like and who actually will be able to apply. Thank you very much. We appreciate your involving us in this conversation and look forward to more detailed conversation on the individual assurances as they come forward.
We do too, and thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your testimony. And Mr. Chesbrough.
Yeah, we've heard a number of very well stated points about what's wrong with linking the academic performance as measured by tests and teacher evaluation. One thing I didn't hear mentioned, or if I did, if it was mentioned, I apologize, and it doesn't apply to all school districts, but I think it's a very real concern in a number of districts in the state, including at least one district in my district, and that is districts where, because of a high immigrant population or other factors, year to year, a classroom can be filled with, in the next grade with a whole new group of students. And so the ability of that school or that teacher to be measured for what transpired during the year with a group of students when those students aren't enrolled at that school anymore is problematic at best. And of course, I think that probably exists to some degree in every school district because there's going to be turnover. But in some districts, it's a very, very large factor. And obviously, in addition to all the other very well stated points about factors beyond the control of the teacher or their capacity as a teacher, that's another one that I think needs to be weighed in trying to determine the viability of linking these two things.
Thank you, Mr. Chesbrough. Mr. Nastandi.
Thank you. I think Pat asked some interesting questions about whether or not we should be addressing these questions if you take the money off the table. I think the problem is I don't think the money's coming off the table. I think, as a number of people have mentioned going forward, as long as Mr. Obama is president, this will be his policies unless they put this together without any forethought. I think this is what they want to see happening. So I think future monies will rely on this. But I think the question that a lot of you have asked is about teacher performance, pupil pay. And as Gary said, there's a lot of other issues that go into whether or not a student is doing well. Absolutely correct. And I think most teachers are doing a very good job. And I think, whether or not this helps, I don't know. But because I think my gut instinct is most principals know, or actually they should know, whether or not that teacher is doing a good job. And I'd rather see more power to the principal to hire and fire the teachers and do those evaluations and not tie them or untie them to specific criteria. Let the principals act as principals. And I think Chair, I think you brought up the issue of mandates, and should we be looking at mandates? We're $1.5 billion that we haven't funded. We absolutely should be looking at that. What mandates can we do without? Why are we requiring mandates that we're not paying for? We should absolutely be looking at that. So I think, going back to Ms. Rucker's question, I think we should be constantly looking at these reforms, which I think the committee does, and the chairwoman has a bill on something that's been mentioned, and so does Mr. Torlakson and so on, and I think the committee has dealt with a lot of these issues, and we should constantly keep asking these questions. But I do think, going back to your point, I don't think there's any choice. These monies or the Washington monies will be tied to these policies one way or the other as we go forward, so we're going to have to deal with them. But I, once again, just want to reiterate, and if anybody wants to comment, I would like to see more evaluation, more site-based management, as they call it, at the local level. I think that, to me, talking to teachers in my district and superintendents and principals, that seems to be something that they all come back to. Let us have control locally, and they know what works and what doesn't work. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Amiano.
Thank you very much. And I agree with the speaker about the standardized tests that were developed for No Child Left Behind being used to provide longitudinal data. I don't know how useful that data would be. I don't even see a purpose in pursuing it, and I think you're all very articulate. I'm glad you went to Boston, because I was trying to find out what the pulse is too, because many times we do live in a bubble, and the information was not forthcoming from the other panelists. I mean, obviously they talk to other states. If they're freaked out, if they have the same concerns, that's very reassuring to us, because we know that we're not just being isolated. Just in general, to any member of the panel, because the teacher issue keeps occurring to me. I mean, are we going to be crippling teachers with pursuing this race to the top? And a very practical question too, kind of the elephant in the room about pensions, et cetera. What would this do to teacher tenure?
Well, I can try to address the first piece of it. I think, and it was brought up by a number of the members, the reason that we're advancing that we mature our assessment system is that, as you have all already seen, I think, in the standardized assessment system, because it's a multiple choice, one time only test given, not even related to when we place staff, it's a very challenging, pivotal piece to use for high stakes evaluation and accountability. What we do believe that we should continue to do is promote the idea that these assessments become really more sensitive to individual student growth, so that as it's incorporated into local evaluations, which, by the way, many districts, I know there's an assumption that districts aren't using student achievement data. They're using it every single day. If you're in program improvement and you have a school, you're looking at that data every day to improve and move those subgroups forward. So our thinking is, while you race to the top, you also make sure that your system is sensitive enough to use data in the future as a component. In relation to, and I can't speak to this long term, but just short term, in relation to tenure and performance pay, we still believe in the locally developed process of a comprehensive evaluation that includes the teaching standards, it includes locally benchmarked assessments, it includes end of course procedures, instructional strategies, classroom management, and the same for the principal. You can't just base it on a test. You have to look at instructional site leadership, budget management, discipline, et cetera. So I don't think you could use one of these components through a federal grant to make all of those decisions.
Okay, I need to parse your question a little bit, so I will take a couple of pieces. Starting with the teacher tenure question, allow me to take that off the table. You can look through and read every single section of the Education Code, and as it relates to K-12 teachers, the word tenure and K-12 teacher is not used in the same sentence. K-12 teachers do not have tenure, they have due process rights. The difference between tenure and due process rights is, if I worked in a bank and Mr. Perez is the president and he walks up to me and says, Patricia, we're going to have to let you go. If I say, why? If I were a K-12 teacher without due process rights, all he would have to tell me is because I said so. So what due process rights guarantee a teacher is the right to ask why and to have the question answered. So, race to the top, unless somebody plans to sweep off the table due process and collective bargaining protections, will not have an impact on the due process rights of teachers. But the question I think you're asking is, how do we create or define both the teacher quality puzzle and the pieces that contribute to that, and then the issues that construct a teacher pipeline to make sure that we're going to be able to replace and bring in a new workforce and replace the current workforce we have. And in that sense, yes, the Race to the Top initiative and some of the mandates as the way they may play out in the field will probably have a sustained effect on the attitudes and values that people have about teaching as a profession. But it's not going to be because people are going to continue to put a target on the back of teachers. I want you to think about what these mandates will do to change or improve or not improve the quality of the educational experience that students will have. The teacher pipeline, what people tend to forget, students make decisions about education as a career based on their experiences as a student. And if we continue to invest in education in such a way that cheapens the educational quality that students view about their school, that changes and cheapens their attitudes and values, we are already tightening or constricting the teacher pipeline because fewer and fewer people will find teaching an attractive field. So we need to take a look at teacher quality and the teacher pipeline from the perspective of the students. Are we, from the side of the desk they're sitting on, actually improving the quality of the educational experience they receive? And from their perspective, does that experience contribute to their decision to look at teaching and consider teaching as an important career field? And then when we get to the arc of support that beginning teachers all the way through their career and becoming veteran teachers would receive, at some moment in their career they stop being new and beginning teachers and they become veteran teachers. What is the quality of the educational experience and the professional support that they receive that will retain them in the teacher workforce? There is nothing in the Race to the Top proposal that addresses recruitment and retention as distinct factors in collecting and developing an architecture for a pipeline that will help California to replace its current workforce and sustain the interest and ability to retain the teachers who are in teacher preparation right now. And then third and finally, and I will close there, when we look then at veteran teachers who have had enough sense as professionals to become veterans, who are architects of the work that they do in their classroom and take great personal pride in the work they do, in the relationships they have with their students, yes, this will have a deleterious effect on their continuing decisions to stay in a profession that does not value their judgment, that does not engage them in the process of reform, and most importantly, that places the sole responsibility for turning around the performance of schools on their work and a single snapshot in time.
Thank you, Ms. Rucker. I'm facing a time challenge here, so if there are not any further questions of the panel, we're going to move to the second panel. But again, yes?
Yeah, just one quick comment.
Yes.
It has already been mentioned that we're facing something of a demographic crisis in California. When the baby boomers move on, we're having a great deal of difficulty recruiting new teachers to move in and fill those slots. We know in California is about 30 to, in some districts, 50% of new teachers leave the profession by the end of 5 years. So strictly speaking, we don't have a problem in California getting rid of teachers. We have a problem keeping teachers. And the main reason when surveyed that they give for leaving is leadership and lack of resources. So just wanted to make
Yes.
that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravani. Our last panel includes Patty Scripter with California State I'm sorry, did I mispronounce the name? Patty Scripter with the California State PTA, Tara Kenny with Public Advocates, and Martha Zaragoza Diaz representing Californians Together. And this panel as well will share their comments provided to the federal government on Race to the Top, and if there are areas where you might agree with the testimony that's already been said, if we could acknowledge that and move on to maybe some other points, that would be very helpful. And again, I'll let the panel decide. Who wants to shall go first. All right.
Good afternoon. My name is Martha Zaragoza Diaz, and I represent the Californians Together Coalition. And this coalition is comprised of 23 professional, parent, and civil rights organizations statewide that focus primarily on providing, looking at educational policy and instructional practices for English learners attending our public schools. You do have a copy of our comments that we submitted to the federal government at the end of your packet. I'll try not to be duplicative of what the other speakers said before me. My first set of comments deal with process issues. The first is that we were very happy to see that the state application for California needs to demonstrate support from stakeholders and LEAs. We believe it needs to go a step beyond that. We believe that there needs to be a broader public input to the state application, especially by parents, and especially those parents who have children in those consistently low-performing schools. I was very happy to hear Mr. Miller state that they are looking at outreach. We recommend that this outreach include, besides having that information on CDE's website, have that information also translated in other languages other than English. Also, to outreach in communities that have parents that don't speak English, and for them to consider also webinars throughout the region, if that's possible, where there's a focus of parent input. This leads to my next set of comments that deal primarily with the teacher effectiveness issue. I agree with all of the other comments that were made with regard to the fact that there needs to be more than one measure of performance other than student test scores in order to evaluate teacher effectiveness. We would like for the state and for the legislature to consider looking at California standards for the teaching profession as a measure. The Commission on Teacher Credentialing is currently revising these standards, and these standards are intended to provide a common language and vision of the scope and complexity of the teaching profession. So we think that maybe that's one area that they may want to take a look at. But with respect to English learners, we really believe that you should take a look at, and it's highly recommended, we highly recommend that you include using the CELT, and you include looking at the Spanish, the standardized test scores in Spanish with regards to other measures for teacher effectiveness. Also, teacher observational tools are recommended to be looked at. Currently, there is a tool developed by Loyola Marymount University called OPAL, and OPAL is based upon research-based best practices for English learners. We believe that this is another measure that could be included with regards to teacher effectiveness. My next set of comments deals with assessments, and the teacher effectiveness issue really begs the question of we need to take a look at what's the best assessment policy for our English learners. We were very pleased to see that one of the ERA assurances is that states must comply with the assurance that assessment measures be valid and reliable for English learners. We were very happy to see that. The coalition and professional testing organizations know that using English-only assessments to measure academic achievement of ELLs not yet proficient in English does not provide valid or reliable measures of their academic performance. Therefore, we recommend that California should include in its state application evidence from test developers as to the validity and reliability of assessments, also the assessments specific to English learners. We believe that that is a step in the right direction, at least to ensure that the assessments are appropriate for our English learners and will yield valid and reliable scores. For English learners, tests learning only in English and with no literacy skills in their home language, the research is clear that modifying the language of our CSTs to control for linguistic complexity helps ELLs access the content of the questions, and allows them to respond on what they know and what they do. In light of the fact that we do not have, in light of the fact that we don't allow the scores of our primary language tests to be included in the calculation of the AYP or the API, minimally, there should be additional accommodations for our English learners with regards to assessments. California does very little with regards to accommodating English learners, and you have before you, I passed out, or there should have been, you have before you what other states do with regards to assessments for English learners and their accommodations. And as you can see, we have other states like Ohio that do more than California, and California probably has the largest ELL student population. So at minimal, we should really, the California state application should really address that assessment issue for English learners and the accommodations for English learners. With regards to Common Core standards, I have not heard any of our previous speakers speak to the fact that Common Core standards should address, again, standards that are appropriate for English learners. This has been an ongoing battle here in California. We have our English language development standards, again, minimally in its state application or in their activities with regards to Common Core standards. California should push for inclusion of ELD standards, specific, again, for our English learners in the Common Core standards. Turning around struggling schools. I have not heard any of, well, some of our speakers mentioned that one of the options that are available, that's the transformational model, should be used as one of the 4 options available to low-performing districts. We believe that the transformational model shouldn't be instead of, if schools can't do either become a public charter school or be taken over by a nonprofit management corporation or organization, or if they can't be restructured, then they can use the transformational model. I think there's enough research that shows transformational models, if done well, can result positively in turning around low-performing schools. So we would like for the transformational model to be one of the options, not the last option. Last but not least, with regards to the state application for the Raise to the Top funds, there should be a specific set of criteria addressing the language and academic needs of the English learners in all of the 4 intervention models. We cannot leave that up to the feds. Our state application needs to require that the criteria in these 4 interventional models include specific criteria that address the instructional needs of our English learners and also our other student subgroups. Additionally, the management group, any new management group, and the public charter schools should assure us that they're going to have qualified staff and teachers that have the skills and the knowledge to be able to instruct our English learners. So in conclusion, those are our recommendations. We hope that we will hear more conversation in terms of how this education reform can be student-centered. And obviously, the education reform needs to be linked to narrowing the achievement gap that we currently have, especially with regards to our English learners. We have seen 7 years in a row that gap increasing between our English learners and our native English speakers. Thank you.
Ms. Kinney?
Good afternoon, Tara Kinney with Public Advocates. Thank you for the invitation to testify here today because we represent a different perspective than the Education Coalition. I'm here today on behalf of Parents and Students for Great Schools. We're a California coalition representing more than 500,000 low and moderate income families in California working to improve public education. Our members are PICO California, California ACORN, Californians for Justice, and Public Advocates. Our comments on the Race to the Top guidance focused on 3 of the 4 ARA requirements, teachers, data, and turning around struggling schools. For these 3 areas, I'd like to share with you what we hope the Race to the Top revised proposal, the final regs, will look like, and how we believe California can make itself a more attractive candidate. First, on teachers. ARA draws attention to the widespread problem of poor and minority students' unequal access to qualified, experienced teachers, and it echoes the mandates of NCLB. It requires states to take actions in 3 ways. First, improve teacher effectiveness. Second, address inequities in the distribution of highly qualified teachers between high and low poverty schools. And third, ensure that low-income and minority children are not taught at a higher rates than other children by inexperienced, unqualified, or out-of-field teachers. But the Race to the Top proposal focuses on effective teachers, as that term is defined in the guidance. We've heard a lot about that today. And it ignores the NCLB and ARA requirements around the equitable distribution of highly qualified and experienced teachers. Neither the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, nor California has the power to change the terms of the federal statute. But it seems like the Race to the Top guidance has really moved away from the focus on highly qualified and experienced teachers. So our comments, and they were echoed by numerous members of Congress, emphasized this requirement. We applaud the focus in the Race to the Top guidance and in this special session on efforts to measure teacher effectiveness in other ways that focus on using multiple criteria to measure teacher effectiveness and not simply student test scores. But California isn't ready with this kind of system yet, and that's why NCLB and ARA focus on teacher full certification status, subject matter competency, the definition of highly qualified teacher, and teacher experience. And Congress recognized these as the best current measures we have of teacher effectiveness. In 2006, California was rebuked by the U.S. Department of Education for not addressing, in particular, the experience index. We were dealing with highly qualified teachers, but not the equitable distribution of experienced teachers. Our application for State Fiscal Stabilization Fund Round $2 and Race to the Top dollars must emphasize in its plan meeting these two equitable distribution requirements on experience and highly qualified teacher status. We've fallen short in the past, and the Education Department required numerous revisions to specifically address this issue. We will be measured, at least in part, against the benchmarks and actions we set in our November 2006 Highly Qualified Teacher Plan that was prepared by CDE. And we're wondering what progress California has to show on this plan. For example, how is the Compliance Monitoring Interventions and Sanctions Program, explained in this plan, working since it was established in 2006 in response to the Education Department's critiques of California's highly qualified teacher progress? Many of the programs put forward in this plan have been suspended or cut or flexed in the recent budget cuts. And in addition, CDE's categorical program site monitoring has been suspended, so it's unclear how California will measure up when compared to the plan it set forward for itself in 2006. So as the legislature undertakes special legislation to make California more attractive as an applicant for Race to the Top funds, we encourage you to consider enacting legislation that will require districts and unions to discuss issues of equitable distribution of teachers by certification and experience in future collective bargaining negotiations. This is one of the stickiest issues for states to address, and requiring that these conversations take place is at least a first step. We also urge you to expand incentives tied to Race to the Top dollars for increasing the number of highly qualified teachers and experienced teachers in hard-to-staff schools and subjects. This was one of the performance indicators listed in the Race to the Top guidance, and the Apple Loan Forgiveness Program is a great candidate for expansion here with Race to the Top dollars. Briefly on data, we supported SB 19 and we're active stakeholders in this process. We hope the governor will sign it and take care of this firewall issue. Our comments to the Education Department also urge them to make state and local data more accessible to families and communities, and to require reporting on school resources, not just student learning outcomes, an opportunity to learn index, if you will. California already has some good data on this in the school accountability report cards, but it would be helpful to have this data in one place and as widely available and used as API data is. On turning around struggling schools, we echo the comments of Californians Together here that the school transformation model shouldn't be the model of last resort. It should be on an equal level as the other three models put forth in the proposal. And we're concerned that the Race to the Top legislation that's come out of the Senate, SB X51, blindly accepts the hierarchy that's in the guidance and puts school transformation model on a second-class basis. We urge you, when drafting legislation here, to wait until the final regs come out and see if this is really necessary. We think the school transformation model is one of the most successful ones for turning around schools. And finally, just a brief word on school finance. In keeping with the goal of making funding a priority as it's set forth in the Race to the Top guidance, we also recommended that the Education Department should give priority to states that have designed their school funding systems to provide a level of funding based on what it actually costs to educate students, including taking into consideration the additional resources necessary to support students from low-income families, students with limited English proficiency, and special education students in meeting our state's academic content standards. We appreciate the commitment of the Assembly and the Chair on restructuring school finance in California in AB 8. This is one of the most important reforms California could make. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And we were going to take questions at the end. Is that all right? We'll move on finally to our last speaker, Ms. Scripter. Welcome.
Thank you. Patty Scripter, California State PTA, the last speaker on the last panel. I'm sure none of you are watching your watches. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. The California State PTA includes nearly 1 million members statewide and approximately 3,800 individual local PTA associations, and 55% of our PTAs are located in Title I schools. That and our 112-year history of advocacy on behalf of all children gives us a unique position to offer policy recommendations based on our experience and the perspective of local parents, educators, and volunteers whose children, grandchildren, and communities are served by the public school system. We're pleased that major education reform is being proposed. Some reforms, such as the building out of the state's data systems, are ones we've been advocating in support of for a number of years. However, we must carefully consider these substantive changes and lasting reforms to ensure that they will provide positive outcomes for children and avoid unintended consequences. The emphasis must be on student needs rather than on an application deadline. Dating back to our analysis and input regarding the Getting Down to Facts study, the Governor's Commission on Education Excellence, and the P16 Council, we believe that reform must be research-based, measurable, and most importantly, sustainable. We acknowledge the sense of urgency created by the short timeline, but our sense of urgency is based on providing all students, especially the historically underserved, opportunities for a high-quality education. We want to be sure that the proposed reforms accomplish what is best for students. We know that the federal government has in the past mandated programs such as IDEA and NCLB without providing the promised ongoing funding commitment required to sustain the programs. And while we greatly appreciate and support the Obama administration's focus on strengthening public education and this series of hearings with our opportunity for input, PTA believes that education reform is not a race with 1 or 2 sprints, but it must be a marathon of ongoing commitment to give our students the education needed to compete in the global economy. Both the National PTA and the California State PTA responded to the proposed regulations. First and foremost, we believe that meaningful and ongoing engagement of parents and families must be included as a core component in each of the education reform areas. Research has shown that effective parent involvement contributes to students' improved academic achievement regardless of the parent's education level, ethnicity, or socioeconomic background. PTA believes that parent and family engagement would strengthen the outcomes in each of the 4 core reform areas. Here's a brief overview of our response to the regulations. National PTA signed on immediately to national core standards. The California State PTA, as others have testified here today, is not willing to give up the high standards that we have at the state level, and we appreciate the movement the state has made towards aligning the content standards, the curriculum, the assessment, and the professional development. So we would be concerned on giving up any of that progress towards national core standards. But that any work towards developing national core standards must include input from educators, parents, and the community, and must be done in a transparent manner. on data systems. In May of 2008, the PTA convention delegates passed a resolution specifically on the need for a longitudinal data system to support efforts to improve student achievement and to help close the achievement gap. And we continue to support the development of a robust longitudinal data system, but it has to do more than just meet compliance requirements. As stated before, we think it's important that not only does it measure individual student achievement and measure the effectiveness of instructional delivery and curriculum support, but in a timely manner, it has to make key data available to help inform instructional practices in the classroom, and it has to give knowledge to parents in the community on how students are performing, how schools are performing, and how effective is the allocation of school resources. And as already stated by others, we believe that any statewide data system must protect both student and teacher privacy. As others have stated, we have a letter of support for SB 19 on the governor's desk, and we support the removal of the firewall between teacher and student data, but as with all assessments, at no time should a single test score be the sole determinant of progress. We support multiple measures for students. We would support multiple measures of assessment for teachers and administrators. We fully support efforts to link data from preschool through higher education. These linkages will facilitate collaboration to improve student outcomes and increase opportunities for students. Linking K-12 and preschool data will provide information on the value of early learning opportunities and assist in developing successful strategies for young children as they transition into K-12. On teachers and leaders, the California State PTA believes that decision-making authority on personnel matters must be at the school district level. Locally elected school boards are directly accountable to the parents and communities who elect them and must have maximum ability to set policies and make decisions to ensure that all students have what they need to meet expectations. We support policies and programs that provide financial and profession-based incentives that encourage individuals to enter and remain in the teaching profession, and ongoing constructive and systematic evaluation programs for all credentialed school personnel. On turning around struggling schools, PTA strongly supports the inclusion of parent-family engagement as a strategy for school transformation and recommends the inclusion of families, PTAs, and communities as equal partners with schools and district staff in developing and implementing any plan for school transformation. Working in partnership with families and communities to design, implement, monitor, and evaluate a range of strategies beyond the limited choices named in the application will help build public will for reform and innovation and will improve student achievement. On increasing the number of charter schools, PTA believes charter schools have a place in the public school system as they provide K-12 students and parents with expanded choices, and they may serve as laboratories for programs that can be replicated in other schools. But we share the same concerns that have already been expressed on oversight, accountability, that charter schools must be both fiscally and academically accountable to parents in the communities which they serve. We also believe that equity and access are paramount, and we support parental choice within the public school system based on the educational needs of students. But any system of choice must admit students based on a fair, equitable, and timely process at all schools, must maintain the racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, learning differences, diversity of the receiving or sending schools and school districts, and must provide opportunities for meaningful and ongoing involvement for parents. One of the selection criteria for a strong RTT application is demonstration of a commitment of support from the governor, the SPI, the secretary, superintendent, school boards, principals, teachers, and union leaders. There's a key piece missing there. We believe that parents must be added to the list in order for these reforms to be successful and to have a robust application. PTA looks forward to providing ongoing input to assist in the submission of a competitive race to the top application. But our overall goal as we consider the necessary reforms is improved educational opportunities for all the students in our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lowenthal.
Thank you. I really appreciate everybody on this panel, and you spoke to many things in common, particularly multiple measures. And what I see in those comments is that even though I think we all agree assessment is important so we understand growth. We also need to understand individual differences in young people, whether they're English language learners, whether they come from backgrounds that are challenging for whatever reason, economic, for example. We really need to support those multiple measures. So I appreciate the comments. I wanted to understand more what the school transformational model was that you referred to.
In terms of time management, I just want to be clear that, in our next hearings, we're going to be drilling further down into these areas. So a discussion around that will get in further detail. Is that all right?
I can wait.
Okay.
I can wait or contact my office.
Mr. Solorio.
Thank you. I wanted to thank these panelists and the panelists before. Everyone's been very good and very informational. I did want to highlight a general point made by Mr. Gosa Diaz regarding English learners. I'm one of those folks that thinks with so many English learners in the state, in fact, having more than any other state, that we should be leading the nation. We should be leading the nation in how we help kids learn English quickly. But unfortunately, right now, many of our students aren't graduating high school because they don't know English well enough. So maybe in the application, we might try to see how we might be able to emphasize that area so that we take this as an opportunity to do better with our English learners, because I think we all agree that we want our children to learn English and we want them to learn it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arambula.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for arranging for this panel, because it serves to remind us that stakeholders are not just the adults that work at the schools, but they include parents who send their kids to schools, and also it includes the community at large. So I think this panel has helped to round out the discussion this afternoon.
Thank you. And Mr. Nasande.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Mr. Solario's point, and I don't have data to dispute what you said regarding the test in English, but I am a big believer in immersion. I took 3 years of Spanish in high school, I think, and I had trouble getting past OLA. So I know the students, though, that did exchange programs and lived somewhere, they caught on very quickly, and I do believe immersion works well. And so the quicker, the sooner they say that you can have them speak in English, the better off they'll be in the long run. Quickly to your point, is it Kenny? Kenny. I agree with the equal distribution of experienced teachers throughout the district, absolutely, and I'd love to hear later on maybe how to work with you to do that, but I think that's a very important concept, and I support that. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the great panels.
You're welcome. Thank you. Ms. Buchanan.
I guess I have a general comment, because I agree we need to have highly effective teachers in all of our schools and classrooms, and sometimes the teacher that's been there 2 years is as effective or more effective as a teacher who's been teaching for 30. So it's hard to measure, how effective someone is in terms of the number of years they've been teaching, or so many different measures. And I also am someone who believes, from my private sector experience as well as my school board experience, I believe in data-driven decision-making. I mean, in California, we know we have some of the highest standards in the nation. And unfortunately, all of us who are in education also know that one high-stakes test does not really measure effectively what students know necessarily, or how effective our teachers or principals are. But if we have high standards, then we have to have a way to assess. I mean, we teach them, and we have to have a way to assess whether the students are learning. I mean, you can't say, well, I taught students how to write a friendly letter if then they can't pick up a piece of paper and write it. We have to have some way of knowing if they can do that. So, and the problem is, as we've heard all day long, is trying to use a test as a single measure of teacher or principal effectiveness or student learning is not the way to go. We need multiple measures. But having said all that, when Deming first brought total quality management to business, which essentially is what data-driven assessment is to education, we're just 30 or 40 years behind the curve here. He said, and in all of his research, what he found was that 15% of the problems were with the employees, that People who go to a job want to do a good job. They don't want to do a poor job at what they're doing. And 85% of the problems were with the system. And he said, if you want to improve quality, improve the system. And I think the same is true in education. That what I see running through so much of this is if we have a problem at a school, let's blame the teacher or blame the principal instead of let's fix the system. And I would like to see in our Race to the Top application the emphasis be put on funding whatever is most critical to improving the system so that we have the tools, whether they're the in-service and training for teachers or principals or the data systems or whatever, but we put our money in a way that we get the biggest bang for the buck in improving the system, because I truly believe that if we focus on the 85% improving the system, then we're going to find out that our teachers are going to be more effective, our principals are going to be more effective, and our students are going to score much higher on the test.
Thank you, Ms. Buchanan, and thank you for participating, and I hope you will continue to participate in this process over the next few hearings that we have. Your input's invaluable, so thank you very much. And before we conclude our meeting, we have a public comment section, and so anyone who wants to speak to us, the time is now. If you want to speak, we'll line up and use this microphone against the wall, and I'm going to be conscientious about the time and ask that you keep your testimony to 1 minute. We are the Education Committee. We know what run-on sentences look like, or sound like. Yeah. So with that, please begin.
Hello, I'm Samantha Tran. I'm with Children Now. I just want to comment that California has made tremendous strides related to student achievement, and we've been making good progress. But as we've been talking about today, there are many achievement gaps that we need to address. And Children Now believe strongly that we should use this opportunity of Race for the Top to really implement some of the reforms that child advocates, business leaders, educators have been talking about for a number of years. And we need to address those 4 assurance areas, but we believe strongly that we need to do that with a coherent vision. And part of that vision could really leverage some of the successes the state has already put into place and is on the verge of putting into place. We have a vision around cradle to career that we think the state should look at and think about and focus really on school readiness and transition. So, for example, really focusing on those years from preschool to kindergarten, the 3rd grade year where kids are learning to, not just learning to read, but reading to learn, transitioning to middle and high school and off to career and college. And so I'll be very brief.
Yeah.
3 quick areas. One,
we're not setting a good example.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just a couple of quick things around early learning, focusing on our quality rating system, implementing that, around supporting systems for schools and students. We've made one of the largest investments in an after-school infrastructure in the nation, and we should think about how to include that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I hear you. And again, for people who are speaking, we are going to drill down in these subject areas. So we are going to have time to hear more from you in the specific area. So thank you. And next?
My name is Linda Gallagher. I'm with the Bay Area Council, and the business community is very solidly behind the aggressive competitive grant process, but feel that it's really important that it be a transparent collaboration among multi-stakeholders so that we can have good support for the final process. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next.
My name is Heather Varendas, and on behalf of my colleagues from the Education Trust West, I want to thank Assemblymember Brownlee for hosting this hearing. While there's no denying that California and its students desperately need more resources, this conversation must move beyond the money and zero in on what is best for students. And what is best for students is not the status quo. If we're serious about forever closing the achievement gap and teaching all students to the highest levels, we need more, not less, of critical information about what is happening inside of districts, schools, and classrooms. One crucial step in that direction is removing the barrier limiting the use of student data for measuring teacher effectiveness. The governor must sign SB 19 now. We need to start focusing on policies that ensure the equitable distribution of effective teachers and principals to make sure that low-income students and students of color are not disproportionately taught by ineffective teachers. And additionally, the one-time Race to the Top funds present a perfect opportunity for the state to make progress on implementing the important interagency linkages between K-12 and early childhood, higher education, and workforce data, as well as the specific inclusion of several career and college outcome measures, such as the early assessment program. Let us seize upon this moment and leverage the awesome potential for collaboration in this room to do what is best for every single student in our state. To be sure, this is an opportunity that our students cannot afford for us to miss. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Steve Henderson, representing the California School Employees Association. We agree that the legislature should look at this issue long and hard. We think the legislature should ask themselves the question, are these the right reforms from California? If they are, we think that you should evaluate those reforms without regard to the money, representing approximately less than 1% of our total education budget. With respect to charter schools, we currently have 700 charter schools operating. I believe our statute authorizes twice that much. It doesn't appear to be necessary to lift the cap on charter schools, but certainly we shouldn't lift the cap on charter schools without looking more into charter school accountability. And finally, with respect to low-performing schools, we would ask the legislature to look at more flexibility for intervention in low-performing schools as opposed to the kind of one-size-fits-all prescriptive and limited suggestions provided in Race to the Top.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Darlene Anderson, and I'm actually just a parent. I have no connection really to education except for being involved with my children. And my biggest concern with Race to the Top is that it really doesn't address the need for the interventions and the accountability model at the local level. We have school, and I heard you mention earlier the IAUSP and the High Priority Schools grants, and I know that I was a parent that was involved in Sac City Unified School District as they went to implement those programs, but it really didn't make a difference for the lowest performing students. So I would ask about the accountability and the data tools you utilize in the local level, at the local level to measure progress. And you say that you can't just count on one test to measure. Well, there are several different tools that a district should be utilizing to measure progress in the local school to ensure that all kids are making progress. But when the district utilizes the student attendance and review boards, and that process pushes children out of the public education system, then I have a problem. And I'm going to continue to stay engaged to ensure that kids have a right to be in the public school system. And how California ensures that all kids are having that opportunity. So I would hope that in the Race to the Top money that we look at holding our local schools more accountable, because our governing board members are elected citizens and they really don't understand about how to utilize the information when they get elected. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say parents, an important title, and we want to hear from you. So thank you for your testimony. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Maxine Sullivan Pepper, and as a former employee of the public school system, now just a mom and a grandmother, I am seriously concerned by the lack of address to the African American students. Based upon the state's recent test scores, the African American students perform far below our English language learner. Even though you might want to say that's just a few points, it's still below. And we're only performing marginally ahead of our special needs, our special education population. In addition to that, I am seriously concerned about the state's application for the Race to the Top money. I heard it remarked that $1 billion was really not a lot of money. But when I look at the fact that the African American children in this state of California provide in seat time, in resource, a great deal of your Title I money that comes into the schools. And in the schools throughout the state that I have visited, several of those classrooms do not even employ a Title I instructional aid for the lowest performing 5% of the students within a local education agency or a school. When it comes down to language, as a product of the urban community, and you may not be able to detect that from my dialect today, but from Del Paso Heights, When I look at the test scores for those students that are coming from that strongly urban community, they have a language barrier too. So when we talk about language
I'm gonna have
as
to
a
ask you to
concept for
conclude.
failure, I'm wrapping it up. I think that we need to look at language across the board. The African American children are performing poorly in language and math. I hope that when you consider this Race to the Top grant, you will certainly consider the need for input from all of the communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Tony Colley Perry. I'm a parent. I'm a graduate from Davis, and my oldest daughter's now in school. And I think the thing I'm concerned about is I don't think any other industry in the world lets a principal be hired and not be in control of his staff, his finances, except education. I think it's troubling to me that a principal can't hire and fire his employees. I don't understand it. And I know that principals do know the solution of what needs to help with kids. And I'm concerned because I don't see the kind of community engagement that there needs to be with the medical field, with all the needs that we have with kids having disabilities and things like that. There's no coordination with hospitals. There's no coordination with behavioral modification people. There's no consistent development of real, authentic partnerships to lessen the need to meet the needs of all children. And I'd like to see that happen. And otherwise, if we don't consider collaborating with real partners to solve the problems, and community partners, I think, that are Hispanic or an African American, don't have a pathway to help with schools, I think we need to open up the doors to their access. And I'm going to be continuing to come to these meetings as a parent and as a grandmother, because I don't feel that we have enough voice and access to help in sharing what our point of view was. And as a single mom who just got her master's, I don't feel that the district has been very supportive to me in my growth. And I'd like to see how can we open up the doors to have people who know how to make those outcomes match and be able to support the public education system in a more meaningful way.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, Tim Valderrama on behalf of TechNet as well as the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. We just want to say that education reform has always been a very important thing to our companies as well as our CEOs. We've been involved in education reform for several years now surrounding the longitudinal data issues, and it's something that we'd like to continue to see going forward. Our companies have been asked to make investments. We make investments regularly around STEM initiatives and improving local schools, and we've been asked to continue to make those investments in states where Race to the Top funds are secured. So we are watching closely what happens here in California. Having said that, a lot of our companies are California-based. We care about education in this state, and we want to see progress made not only for our companies and so that our workforce is trained, but also just to benefit the children of California. So we thank you for having these discussions. We want to continue to program with you and work with the governor and the superintendent and all interested parties to make sure that we move something forward on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Dave Walrath, representing Small School Districts Association. You have our written testimony. The comments are going to be more philosophical. To the best of my knowledge, there is no documented research-based proof that the federal government has a better idea and success record of intervening for school achievement than do states. I would suggest that California do what we think is best, let the feds decide if it works, but not necessarily feel compelled to follow their lead, since we're not sure if their lead will be any more successful than our lead in building upon our experience in California. The second is, I would urge the committee not to take actions based upon what might be in the SEA reauthorization. The administration undoubtedly will propose many things for reauthorization, but it's highly possible that Congress will not buy all of those issues. I would urge you to be careful and think about the implications, and that if we are to pass legislation based on the SEA reauthorization, it be after the final bill is enacted, rather than based upon the proposals that may be coming forward from the administration. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last witness.
This is Harold Boyd, United Teachers, Los Angeles. I just hope that the hearings that we hold will become hearings entitled Race to Help Our Classrooms. And I hope this does not end up being strictly a teacher thing. Problems occur, and many of those problems can solve the problems in the classroom. 2 examples. Dropouts, absenteeism, chronic absenteeism, the involvement of parents in our schools. We have to get our parents into our classrooms to work with our teachers. It's the only way we're going to solve this problem. And we must take this race to the top and make it a race to improve our classrooms, to improve our schools. And this is part of our problem, is trying to get the community involved in educating our kids. And I think that would be a big plus for our schools.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate the public comment and look forward to more of it as we proceed through these informational hearings. I want to thank the presenters for presenting today. It was very helpful to give us the first overview and get the entire committee sort of up to speed on where we are and where we potentially can go. I look forward to our next hearing, which I believe is October 28th. In the morning, we'll certainly send along more information, and we'll look forward to the October 28th meeting, which we will be drilling down on the first 2 items, standards and assessments, and data. So with that, again, I thank all my colleagues for participating and your attention. And with this, this informational hearing is adjourned.